Now we have so far seen how we get a movement along the demand curve whenever there is a change in the own price of the commodity. And we said that if own price goes up, there is a movement in the upward direction along the demand curve so that quantity demanded goes down. And if there is a decrease in price, then there is a downward movement along the same demand curve so that the quantity demanded increases. So this is something we have already covered, but now we are saying what would happen if the price, the own price of the commodity itself is constant. So we are saying that if P own is constant or unchanged, now this is something you must remember all through this video, that the price is not changing, the own price of the commodity is constant, and we relax the assumption of ceteris paribus. So that means now we assume that some of the other factors in the market are changing. Now what are these other factors in the market? Now I call those factors the non-price factors or the non-price determinants of demand, and these are also the demand shifters. So these are the factors that really lead to the shift of the demand curve. So the demand shifting factors, and they are non-price factors. Now first let us go through these factors and then we will see how they cause a shift of the demand curve or a change in demand. Now to remember these factors, these non-price factors which could shift the demand, I use this word tribe. Now please be aware that this is not something you would find in a textbook. This is something that I have used as a student to remember the demand shifters, and I always share it with my students. Maybe they will find it useful to remember the demand shifting factors. Now this is basically an acronym that goes through all the demand shifting factors. Now T stands for the taste or preference. Since we are on the demand side, obviously we are worried about buyers, so we are talking about the tastes and preferences of buyers or consumers. R stands for related goods, and we are specifically talking about the price of the related goods. Now there could be two kinds of related goods, and I will talk to you about both. One is a substitute, and the other is a complement. And in a minute I will talk to you about both kinds. I stands for income. And once again, since we are on the demand side, we are worried only about buyers. So we are talking about the income of buyers or consumers. B stands for the number of buyers. So how many buyers are there in the market? And E stands for expectation. And it is the expectation of buyers that we are worried about in the demand side. So these are the non-price factors. Please note that each of these factors are something other than the own price of the commodity. Even here when we talk about price, we are really talking about the price of a related good, but not the price of this good in question. Okay. So now we are really looking at how a change in any of those factors would affect the demand in the market when the price of the commodity in question stays constant. Okay. So let's start with a demand curve. So we have quantity demanded, we have own price, and let this be our good old market of ice creams. And let's say I have a demand curve for ice creams, capital D, and this is the initial price of ice creams. Let's say this is $P1. It could have any value. For us this P1 was $5 if you remember, and we have a quantity demanded, right? and it could be really any quantity, but I think for us the quantity demanded was 13 ice creams at price $5. And if you remember, how did we get that quantity demanded? We got that quantity demanded by adding up horizontally the quantity demanded of every individual buyer of ice cream in the ice cream market. Okay. Now let's say this initial price of ice cream is constant. So that is our first assumption. There is no change in the price of ice cream. But let's say some other non-price factor has changed. Maybe there has been an increase in the number of buyers of ice cream. No change in the price, right? But there has been one new buyer added in the market. So instead of just having John, Jack and Joe, now we also have maybe Jane, who has come into the market and wants to buy ice cream. So if you remember, at the same price, now you have another extra buyer, which basically means that new quantity demanded, Jane's quantity demanded, is getting horizontally added onto the other three without any change in the price. So at price P1, now you would have a higher quantity demanded, and that higher quantity demanded is because of this new buyer Jane who has got added onto the market, right? And that would be true for any other price. That would be true for a price P3, and that would be true for a price P2. Even when there is no change in the price, at every price level, you would see this additional quantity demanded, and this additional quantity demanded would be owing to this new buyer who has entered the market. And the only way that this additional quantity demanded could be represented is through a new demand curve, which is basically a demand curve which is to the right of the original one. In other words, this could be represented through a shift of the original demand curve to the right to something like D dash, right? So very simply put, I could say that even when there is no change in the price of the commodity, just because new buyers have come into the market, now you have additional quantity demanded, as a result of which there is a right shift of the original demand curve to something like D dash. Had there been less number of buyers in the market, then you would see an opposite reaction. Even when the price stays constant, there would be a left shift of the demand curve to something like D double dash. Okay, so that means we can say that anything which takes the quantity demanded up, anything that leads to a rise in the demand causes a right shift of the demand curve. Once again, I want to remind you that this up arrow is signifying an increase, and anything that leads to a decrease in demand would be represented through a left shift of this demand curve. Once again, assuming that the price, the own price of the commodity is constant. Now a simple example, let's say we are in the textbook market, okay, and you are at the beginning of the semester and the price of the textbook is $100. But at the beginning of the semester, everyone wants to buy a textbook because that is the recommended text. So there is a higher demand for textbooks, so you would see a right shift of the demand curve for textbook. But at the middle of the semester or end of the semester, nobody wants a textbook at that point, or very few buyers want a textbook at that point because everyone has already bought a textbook. So even without no change in the price of textbook, the price is still $100, but you now see a lower demand for textbook, and that would be represented through a left shift of the demand curve for textbook. Okay, so this would be true for any of these factors. If any of these factors change in such a way that the demand goes up, there would be a right shift of the demand curve, and if any of these factors change in such a way that there is a decrease in the demand, then you would see a left shift of the demand curve. For example, think about taste or preferences of the buyers. Once again, we are in the ice creams market. Maybe it is summertime, right? It is very hot. So many buyers now prefer to have ice creams because it is summer. Has anything happened to the price of ice creams? No. But just because more buyers now want to have ice creams, they prefer to have ice creams, you see a higher demand, and that would be represented through a right shift of the demand curve to something like D dash. Now opposite would happen in winter. In winter, not many people would want to have ice creams. They don't prefer to have ice creams. Once again, nothing has happened to the price of ice creams. It is still the same, but people prefer to have less ice creams, so you would see a drop in quantity demanded, and that is possible through a left shift in the demand curve at every possible price of ice cream to something like D double dash, right? Now let's go through the more critical ones. Let's go through R, and let's go through income, and let's go through the expectation of the buyers. Now when we talk about related goods, there are two kinds of related goods that we deal with. Substitutes. Let's say the price of substitutes be P sub and the price of complements be P com, right? So these are two related goods. For example, if you have ice creams, then a substitute for ice cream would be something that is an alternative for ice cream. So maybe something like a frozen yogurt. That could be a substitute for ice cream. So any alternatives of a commodity is a substitute. For example, if you consider sports shoes, then maybe Nike and Adidas and Skechers, these are all substitutes of each other. If you think about cola beverages, then maybe Coke and Pepsi, these are substitutes of each other, right? So substitutes are basically alternatives, and complement is anything that is jointly consumed with a good. So you have them together. Okay, for example, pizza and soda, you have them together. Wine and cheese, you have them together. So both the commodities are separate commodities, but they are consumed by the buyer together. So if you are still in the ice creams example, then maybe the ice cream cones are a good example for a complement good. You eat them together, you consume them together, right? Now what would you see in the ice cream market if there was an increase in the price of a substitute? Please note, if the price of a substitute went up, if the price of frozen yogurt went up, then people would now prefer to eat frozen yogurt instead of ice cream. So in the ice cream market, you would see a decrease in the demand for ice cream. Isn't it? Sorry, the other way around. If the price of the substitute, if the price of the frozen yogurt went up, then people do not want to have frozen yogurt because that is relatively more expensive, right? So instead of having frozen yogurt, people would prefer to eat ice creams. So in the ice cream market, you would see an increase in the demand for ice cream to something like D dash. Please note, nothing has happened to the price of ice cream. The price of ice cream is still constant, but because a substitute good became expensive, some people who were earlier having frozen yogurt now start having ice cream, so you see an increase in the demand for ice cream. So as price of the substitute rises, the demand for the good in question rises. In other words, you see a right shift of the demand curve, and the opposite would be true if there was a drop in the price of the substitute. If the price of the substitute went down, if frozen yogurt became cheaper, then people would start having frozen yogurt because that is relatively cheaper. And some of the people who were earlier having ice cream now would move on to frozen yogurt. Please note once again, nothing has happened to the price of ice cream, but just because frozen yogurt has dropped in price, now the demand for ice cream would go down, or in other words, you would see a left shift in the demand curve for ice cream. Okay? Now, what would happen in case of a complement? Remember, the complement, they are being consumed together. They are going hand in hand, right? Something like DVD players or ice creams and cones. So if the price of a complement goes up and I will try to put this in the same place. So I'm going to wipe this out and see what is the relationship in case of a complement. Just talk about a complement here. So if the price of a complement goes up, if the price of the cones go up, then people do not like to buy the cones because that is expensive, and since they consume the ice cream and cones together, they also do not like to buy the ice creams. Please note, nothing has happened to the price of ice cream, but just because the jointly consumed good has become expensive, they don't want to buy the cones, they also do not want to buy the ice cream. Think about, pizza and soda. Pizza and soda go hand in hand. If pizza becomes expensive, people do not want to buy the pizza, so they also do not buy soda. That is exactly what we are talking about, right? And if the price of the complement goes down, then people buy the complement, and at the same time, they also buy some of this good, ice creams, and so you would see a higher demand for ice creams. And that would be represented through a shift of the demand curve for ice cream. It would be a right shift in case of an increase and a left shift in case of a decrease. That would still hold true. So this part is still true no matter which factor is causing that shift. Any of those factors could have changed, but the shift is always going to be in a rightward direction for an increase in demand and in a leftward direction for a decrease in demand. That's still going to be true. So you can see that there is an inverse relationship between demand for the commodity and the price of a complement, whereas there is a direct relationship between the price of a substitute and the demand for the commodity. Now I wiped that part out, but you can go back and see that in the video. So for the substitute, there is a direct relationship, whereas for the complement, there is an inverse relationship between the price and the demand for the commodity. Now let's talk about the income of the buyers. What would you see for income of the buyers? Now, usually if income goes up, then you tend to buy more of any commodity without anything happening to the price of the good. If you earn more, you buy more. You earn more, you buy more clothes. You earn more, you buy more cars. You earn more, you probably buy more food, right? So if you earn more, you tend to buy more, and if you earn less, you tend to buy less without anything happening to the price of the commodity. If you earn more, you probably eat ice creams every day. If you earn less, probably you eat an ice cream every 15 days, right? Has anything happened to the price of ice cream in the market? Well, the answer is no. So you have so you really have a direct relationship between income and the demand for a commodity, and that would be true for most commodities that you see around yourself, and these commodities for which you have a direct relationship between income and demand are called the normal goods. So when we are talking about the income of buyers, we can distinguish between two kinds of goods. The normal goods, and the other kind is the inferior goods, which are qualitatively inferior. So for the normal goods, you would see a direct relationship between income and demand. As income goes up, the demand goes up, so there's a right shift. As income goes down, the demand goes down, so there is a left shift. And for inferior goods, as income goes up, the demand actually goes down. Excuse me. Okay, so for inferior goods, as the income goes up, the demand actually goes down, because these are qualitatively inferior goods. Think about something like thrift store clothes. Okay, if you earn more, would you buy thrift store clothes? The answer is no, you would buy less, right? But if you earn less, then you probably buy more of these goods because you are making less money, so you have no other option but to buy inferior goods. You can think about used furniture, used cars in that category, right? You earn more, you buy less inferior goods, you earn less, you are compelled to buy more of these inferior goods. So there's an inverse relationship. So what we get here is for income, the relationship really depends on the nature of the commodity. For example, if you have ice creams is probably a normal good, right? So for a normal good, you have a direct relationship between income and demand. For an inferior good, you have an inverse relationship for income and demand, right? But this is still true. If the demand increases, you would get a right shift. If the demand decreases, you would get a left shift. And this is still true. That is, the price of the commodity is held constant. What is changing is the income of the buyers. That's the only change, okay, which is causing the shift in demand. The last is the expectation of the buyers. Now, what is this expectation about? Please note that we are talking about the expectation of buyers, and we are talking about the expectation about own price in the future. So please be clear about this. Do not be confused. So the own price today is still constant, but what is changing is the expectation about what is going to happen to the price in future. The price today is constant. It is at $5 maybe, okay? But I am thinking as the buyer, what could happen to the price in the future, and based on that, I am changing my demand decision, my buying decision today, okay? So, if I expect the price to be cheaper in the future, if I know that the commodity will become cheaper in the future, then obviously I am not going to buy more today, isn't it? So if price in the future I expect it to drop, then the demand today is going to be lower because I am going to wait when the price drops in the future and buy it then instead of buying it now. So my demand today is going to be lower, and I will see a left shift in the demand curve today. Isn't it? Think about it. Before Christmas, maybe in November, you know that the Christmas sales are going to start from the first week of December, and things are going to start being on discount. So you do not buy your clothes in November. You wait until the Christmas sale starts. So your demand in November is going to be low because you know that the prices are going to drop in the future. So your demand today in November is going to be low. Okay, that is exactly what we are talking about. But has anything happened to the prices now? Has anything happened to the prices in November? The answer is no. The current price is still constant, but my expectation about the price in the future is what changes, and that's why my demand changes, right? Similarly, if I expect the prices to be higher in the future, if I know the price is going to be higher in the future, then I don't want to wait until the future. I just want to buy everything now, right? So my demand today is going to be higher because I rather buy it now when the prices are relatively cheaper than wait longer when the prices actually rise. So my demand today is going to increase, and that would be represented through a right shift of the demand curve. So please note that in this video we have gone over the various other factors in the market which could change and affect the demand curve such that any increase in the demand would shift the demand curve to the right, any decrease in the demand would shift the demand curve to the left, and all along we assumed that the price of the commodity right now in the present time is constant. That is a very important assumption. So this change, this shift in demand is also called a change in demand. Please note, this is different from what we had done in the last video. When we had a change, an increase in price, we had a movement along the demand curve and we called it the change in quantity demanded. If you do not remember, then please go back to the previous video and refresh your memory. Whenever we looked at a change in the price of the commodity, we saw there was a movement along the same demand curve. There were no shifts, and we called it the change in quantity demanded. But here we are assuming that the price of the commodity is fixed, but some other non-price factor is changing in the market such that you get a shift of the demand curve, and that change, that shift of the demand curve is called a change in demand. Okay, so please understand carefully this difference between change in demand and the change in quantity demanded. Now next we will go on to the supply side and look at things from the seller's perspective.